There he is.
Mr.
My
Cory,
man.
Mr. Cory Smith.
Oh, I didn't put a hat on today. I got to find a hat here. Hold on.
You've had a haircut.
How are you? How's the beach?
Oh, I've been very decadent, actually. In the last week, I've been. Do you know what? I think you could go to a different beach in Greece every year of your life, and you wouldn't get to all of them. It's such an amazing place. We'll get to that in a bit. You know what? This is episode 20. Number 20.
Can you believe it?
I know. We've been doing this for nearly 6 months. 1 hour of podcasting apparently is about 708,000 words. So that's 708,000 words per episode. That's 156,000 words. The Hobbit, the book, is only 96,000 words. So we've been doing a lot of content. We haven't invented our own language, though. So
well, we'll get to work on that. That'll be season 2.
We will. I don't think anyone understands us speaking English, let alone if we try and invent our own language. So. This is the Pilote podcast, episode number 20, with David Fuller and Cory Smith, in which we talk about the great relocation and the state of creativity. So yeah, you're right. I had a couple of days out last week. I drove 4 hours south of Athens to Sparta. And some people might know Sparta through the rather bizarre film adaptation of...
Well, you know, when you said that, I actually heard that in my head.
What was it? What was the film? What was the film? It's 300?
300.
Which was based on a graphic novel. You're big into your graphic novels.
Yes,
so.
And I've read the graphic novel and I've seen the movie.
It's a little bit ostentatious. It's a little bit.
It's ambitious. It's ambitious in scope.
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen it all the way through, but anyway, last week I went down to Sparta for real, and it's an incredible landscape. Yeah, some enormous mountains next to the sea, big walls, old forts, old churches, empty beaches. The food is locally produced, Sparta branded beer. Got to do some introspection. What I did do is I doubled down on the idea that I want to spend as least time in the metaverse as possible. I know that sounds
on
controversial.
Vacation?
No, at all. I think the metaverse is a fantastic idea, and I'm not against anyone who's spending millions of dollars building out the metaverse, but I don't want to be there. I want to spend as much time in the analog world as possible.
It's funny that you say that. I'm gonna make a statement. So since you and I have been doing this podcast and we've spent so much time talking about the metaverse, and I'll take a moment to say that our interest in the metaverse really is what spawned this podcast.
It was certainly part of it. Yes, definitely part of it.
I've spent even more time thinking about and exploring the metaverse, and not in a good way. It's made me I think in some respects, in all honesty, more jaded about it, and not like jaded like I think it's bad or it's not going to be good or whatever. It just in our discussions and interacting with people that are I'll use the charitable term enthusiastic in social media about the metaverse. In my interactions with them, I have become much more non-enthusiastic about it, borderline argumentative about the way that people are portraying the metaverse and the way that they are. Optimistic isn't even the right word. They're disingenuous.
No, there's some Kool-Aid. There's some Kool-Aid drinking going on. That's
100%, man. And I have found I used to kind of giggle because I see you interact with people all the time, and I always agree with what you say. But I have in the past been like, I'm not gonna engage with them, even though I disagree with them. I find myself doing it now too. And I yesterday was arguing with somebody about real estate in the metaverse. I couldn't help myself.
Well, my position on that. I'm very, very clear on what I
yes.
think. I just think that's an outright scam. But anyway, we will.
It is, and somebody else on LinkedIn called somebody out about that as well, and there was a hot debate going on about it, and I jumped into the fray as well. And it's true. It is. It's preposterous.
Yeah.
And so, and the person's argument was, well, the blockchain will prevent them from blah blah blah. And I'm like, what are you talking about?
It hasn't yet. I've always been on the bleeding edge of technology. I'm a massive technology fan, and so are you, right? We've been through the cycles. We're always interested to see how technology might disrupt all sorts of things, whether it's disrupting the culture, whether it's disrupting power balances, whether it's disrupting fashion or trends. I'm still bullish on blockchain technology. I think it's got some incredible things to offer. It's how it's being applied I have a massive problem with right now. The market downturn, I think, is going to wash out a lot of the pretenders, which is great.
Yes.
But I think long-term, the metaverse, which is ill-defined, it's still very, very, very difficult to explain to real people what the metaverse might be or could be. It's certainly not here right now. If I sit on a beach or I go to a temple complex in the Peloponnese, which is 4,000 years old, 4,000 years old, 2000 BC, they had running water, they had plumbing, they had pipes, and has a civilization, has an economic system. And people who are 20 years old are trying to tell us how the world's going to work going forwards. There's a total lack of collective memory. I had a nice couple of days. Let's just put it that way. I think analog experience is underrated, and we
absolutely
spend as much time as possible in the analog universe, and the metaverse can wait.
Technology in all of its forms, not just digital technology, but the wheel or any kind of technology.
Yeah, the printing press.
The printing press. All of these things were designed, were engineered, were created to enhance our lives, to make things easier, right? So if anything, including the metaverse, is created and not enhancing our lives in some way, it's not necessarily a good thing, right? One of the things that you said early on that I always use is kind of the litmus test. In fact, in my work is like, what's the utility? Does this enhance my life?
Which I've started to ask people that, and it's crickets.
Right.
An interesting conversation this week with a Web3 company, and funnily enough, our diversity in Web3 episode is the least listened to episode we've ever done.
Really?
Which is not surprising, but a little bit disappointing.
I think it's one of the most interesting topics.
It's certainly
that we've ever discussed.
I mean, if you're considering who's building the future of our life and our community and our civilization, at the moment, it seems to be a bunch of techies, and many of them are white males, and a lot of the funding is coming from Gen X white males. If they're the people building the future, maybe some sort of weird revenge. I mean, and you and I are both Gen X. We're both a forgotten generation, but we're not being vindictive about it. We're not trying to lock out the next generation from what happens next. Do you remember last week? Oh, sorry, not last week because we're off last week. But the week before, I brought up this idea of a sentient AI, and you kind of laughed at it and dismissed it. And then you went back and you looked at the video. So tell me what you found when you went back and you actually dug into this.
On the surface, just to talk about the sentient AI, of course, all of those things come up of like the Skynet, or like it's going to take over the world, or these are the things that it conjures just kind of instantly or on the surface, or like the debate of, is this AI a person, or does it have rights, or whatever?
Right.
Like
so the Turing test. Exactly,
the Turing test. But when I watched the interview with the actual ethicist from Google that got canned, and the questions that were raised were way more interesting to me than any of that.
Right, because they ask you things like, do you fear death? Or what is your definition of fear? And all these...
Well, even beyond that,
it's complex questions, right?
Well, it was the questions of, and I'm going to go skip to the end and work backwards. The idea of colonialization in AI. Why is Google, as an example, firing or continuing to fire all their AI ethicists for asking questions like Google, and I'm using them as the example. They're not the only example.
Right.
They're the ones that are creating the rules about how their AI treats or can respond to things about religion or values, right? And these AIs are the things that drive Google search, Siri, Alexa. They're the ones that are making the decisions about what data sets are fed to the AI and how those AIs can respond to those kind of questions, right?
Just as an aside, there's a very interesting thing going around that I saw yesterday, which if you type desk ornament into Google and do an image search, you are presented with a bunch of Nazi memorabilia. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. We've tried it in France. We've tried it in Greece. We've tried it in the US. You type desk ornament into Google and do an image search, you are presented with a bunch of Nazi memorabilia. It's very chill. It's a bit chilling.
That's bizarre.
I don't know if it's just really good SEO or whether there's something else. There's something else going on. But
there are a handful of people in rooms that are behind closed doors that don't have any oversight, where the public interest don't have any oversight or any input into how these things are being decided. These Western companies designed and driven by Western culture are creating these things that drive the way most of the world view and learn about the world and other cultures. Or certainly it colors the way we learn and understand different cultures.
But Hollywood's been doing that for 50 years. It's in cultural imperialism. You know, Hollywood has been exporting the American dream to the rest of the world for years.
Right, but this is, I believe this is even more pervasive, because you can choose to go see a movie or not.
Correct.
Like,
you have to go and pay for a ticket and go and see.
Right, like
every which way.
Everybody uses Google search, and so now we're kind of saying, okay, well, now here's Google, almost singular tool that you are used worldwide by everybody in every corner of the world. And we are forcing these kind of Western cultural values. You have to learn them to use the tool. And then you're being fed information to learn about things through the lens of a Western culture. And it's the data that you're being fed is only the data sets that Google either chooses or has available to it about whatever it is.
Right. Alexa's the same. So if you're doing a voice search on Alexa, you get whatever Alexa is being fed, which is mostly US queries.
Right. So it's ostensibly, as this person has described, AI colonialism. It could ostensibly erase smaller cultures completely off the map.
Maybe.
Which I thought was a much more interesting question than, is this AI sentient and does it have rights?
But there's several billion Chinese, Indonesians, and Indians. Are they using Google in English, or are they using Google in their localized language, or is there some other?
They're using it in their localized language, but it's simply translated.
Right.
I thought the story that you brought was interesting in and of itself, but then in kind of digging into it, like you said, it was a much more nuanced conversation that was like, oh, wow, I didn't even think about that.
You just start a Google search and you see what the predictive results are. Most of them are pretty horrible. They're misogynistic, they're racist,
Yeah, I wrote a story, I don't know, a year and a half ago on bias in AI, particularly gender bias. And so it's not a surprise. Like, this is the dilemma of ethicism in any business.
I think it's getting better. So I've just typed into Google women should be, and the two top answers from Google are women should be financially independent, and the second one is women should be prim and proper. So one of them is from 2022 and one of them is from 1916.
It's just such an interesting time, as like here in America with the overturning of Roe versus Wade. It's just such an odd.
I shouldn't be smiling because this is a very serious topic. I just typed into Google guns are, and the top two responses are guns are not the problem, and the second one is guns are the problem.
Speaking of guns, I was talking to my wife last night. As I think you know, she's a state prosecutor, a district attorney here in Georgia. And, there was another shooting, as we know, here in the United States.
There were 8 over Independence Day weekend. There were eight mass shootings.
And so my wife told me that it was the 308th mass shooting in the United States. 308.
This year.
That's unfathomable.
I love the US. I'm not American. I love the US, but I think you're losing your hold on the moral majority. I mean, the US has always held itself up as this bastion of democracy and freedom and independence and everything else. And, if it happens in Yemen, it's them over there. If it happens in Paraguay or some banana republic, it's not a problem. But if it starts to happen in Washington, D.C., then that is a problem. Moving on, The Great Escape. Tell me about.
I was just going to say, what a great segue.
Tell me about The Great Escape, Cory.
Speaking of gun violence, crazy things happening in the United States, one of the conversations that I had recently, one of my very, very closest friends that I've known for many years, the godfather of my children, a buddy of mine I went to college with. He's also an attorney, ironically, from South Florida. About 2 years ago, he and his wife is actually a native Spaniard who's traveled the world, and they had planned to do a trip around the world for a year, but it was kiboshed by the pandemic. And so this year they were able to take the trip. So they just returned from 10 months of traveling around the world. They were Spain and Sri Lanka and India and all over Europe and Thailand and New Zealand and Australia. They went everywhere. After spending all this time out of the country, would you characterize this trip as life-changing? Did it? And he said, yeah, absolutely. He's like, being out of the US for the last 10 months was fantastic because it just kind of exposed them to a lot of different people and cultures that were very welcoming. And it was nice to have kind of a break from the American news cycle.
What I would be really interested in is what his thoughts were of America from outside. Being American outside of America, I imagine, is quite difficult at the moment.
Right. And so it's like he described it as, people in other countries have always kind of thought as America as this kind of like, Reagan's kind of shining whatever, or sitting on a hill.
A beacon of democracy.
Right, a beacon. And it's kind of like fallen from grace in some respects. And people are kind of like, I'm really sorry that has happened. I know it must be hard for you kind of attitude in the nicest possible way. So I was like, well, what's next for you now that you're back? Are you going to, go back and practice law again, after being back? And he's like, nope. We were here for 2 weeks. We've decided we're done. We've put our house in the market and we're immediately moving to Spain. And I'm like, what? They've come back to 308 mass shootings and Roe versus Wade being overturned and just so much turmoil. They're like, we don't want to deal with that. We love America. We don't, it's not like we're forsaking our country, but like there's just too much upheaval here. And, there's no reason for us to be here to endure that. they've decided they're going to move to Mallorca, and they have applied for, as we have discussed in the past, one of the many nomad visas.
There is a certain class of people, there's a certain group of people who are globally mobile. Yeah,
That's right.
I'm one of them. I can pick up tomorrow. I can live wherever I want. If I want to go to Singapore, I'll go to Singapore. If I want to go to Dubai, I'll go to Dubai. If I want to go to Australia, I'll go to Australia. But you know what? I've got choice. Right now, the US is not on my shortlist. The fact there were 8 mass shootings on Independence Day weekend is just...
Right.
There's something fundamentally wrong there. I'm not blue or red. I don't have a dog in this fight, but Independence Day weekend's meant to be the celebration of America and all its best forms. And if you've got 8 mass shootings, including, some 2-year-old kids whose parents are shot dead in a parade, things aren't going well, Cory.
No, and that was his point. Is he's like, I don't think that things are going to get better in the next 2 years. I think they're going to get more polarized, more dangerous, more unstable, and I just choose not to be there. So after having that conversation with him, I made a post about it on my social media accounts just to kind of take the temperature of what people were thinking about that. And ironically, a lot of people I know are doing the same thing. Moving to other places. They're moving to Belize. They're moving to Thailand. They're moving to Asia. They're moving to other places in Europe, doing the same thing. And I'm like, have I not been paying attention? Have I missed the boat?
I like the sound of Belize. Belize is somewhere I've always wanted to go. It looks nice.
Part of this kind of great resignation thing or great reassessment. It's like this pandemic has caused us to reassess what's important to us. And
right, but there's a relatively small part of the population who have those choices.
That's right.
You and I have those choices because we're digital natives. We write code, we build websites, we do Zoom calls. It doesn't matter whether we're sitting on a Thai beach or whether we're sitting in an apartment in Mallorca, we can do that. But a lot of people don't necessarily have those choices.
That's right. So, and we know a lot of people that do this. And like a lot of our friends are in this business. So it was just interesting to me that, a lot of people are like, hey, we've spent a lot of years in the rat race of sitting in traffic and commuting. And like, we've realized we don't have to do that.
But I think that is a new thing for the US, though. Probably since World War II, America has been a place that has accepted people who want to live in the US because of everything that it's offered. If we're now at a tipping point where even Americans are saying, you know what, not only do we not want to accept people into the country, but we want to leave, and you've got net migration out of the US, then that's going to cause some really interesting problems. If the people who are mobile are in the digital information economy and just say, you know what, stuff this, I'm going to sit in Bali, in a villa in Bali, because it cost me a fraction of what it cost me in downtown Atlanta, and it's sunnier and it's nicer and I don't get shot. Thanks for listening. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe so that you don't miss out on any episodes. Also, be sure to check out some of our earlier discussions. You can contact us via social media or via our website. Now back to the show. And we're back. So, tell me about creativity.
Over the weekend, I was rabbit holing on social media, primarily YouTube, as one does. And I came across this TED Talk.
I'm glad to hear that you are spending more time on TED Talks and less time on TikTok. But anyway, we'll
I do spend time. TikTok is usually my end of the night, 11:30 to midnight thing. But I came across this TED Talk that was Ethan Hawke, and it was one about creativity. And I believe the title of it is Give Yourself Permission to Be Creative. Ethan Hawke, have your opinion about him as an actor. I personally like him, and he's a truly he's a creative person. I work with a lot of creatives in the fields that I've worked in over the years, designers and artists and writers and what have you. And there's a certain type of person, a personality that I would characterize as a creative. And they live a certain lifestyle and they have a certain kind of way of thinking about things. And I consider him to be one of them based upon the way he talks. So it kind of like,
I don't know. I think he's grown into it slightly. I wouldn't have said that in his early career he necessarily he didn't really push the boat out.
There was a larger message, and it took him like, I guess, 9 minutes to get to the point that I was really interested in. But his kind of point was about allow yourself to be creative. And the story started more about how creativity is vital and a vital part of the human experience. And people don't really think about how, people generally feel creativity is it's kind of like nice, and it's a nice to have, and it's warm and fuzzy. And they think about art that way as something that's kind of a luxury until something happens in your life, like you lose a loved one, or you lose a child, or you fall in love, and like your heart is so full of love that you just like.
Yeah, I heard that he was speaking specifically about poetry in that sense, though, wasn't he? He was saying that most people think that poetry is a useless art form until something that has an incredibly impact on your emotions. You turn to something like poetry, whether that's an Eagles song or whether a Bob Dylan song, or whether that's Keats or Shakespeare. You go through your life thinking poetry is useless until an incredibly something heart-wrenching, good or bad, happens, in which case you do turn to poetry in
somebody
order to put it into context.
Right. And I think that can be said about any kind of art, right? Like a painting or a song or a play or anything. And that's when you realize how creativity or art is vital or essential and not just a luxury. So that was kind of a piece of what he was saying.
The one that sticks in my mind is, if you remember 4 Weddings and a Funeral, the funeral scene where, I can't remember the Scottish actor's name.
Oh, yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about.
And he reads a W.H. Auden poem. I think it's called Stop All the Clocks. And this, I think, is exactly what Ethan Hawke is talking about. It's like, poetry is nothing. It's not cool to go, oh, I'm into poetry. But when you listen to that poem, stop all the clocks, cut off the telephone, prevent the dog from barking with a juicy bone, silence the pianos with a muffled drum, bring out the coffins, let the mourners come. That soliloquy that he says in the church at the funeral is poetry, but it fits within that context of loss and heartache. And poetry is useless until you need something extra in order to help your heart fill in the gap of
or give
incredible
it gives
emotions.
Words to something that you can't give words to.
But somewhere a poet has already done it, and you're like, oh, that's exactly what I was thinking.
What he went on to say, which I thought was super interesting, because, and why it's interesting to me is that, as you may know, like, one of my sons just graduated high school, and he, of course, doesn't know what he wants to do. He's 17. So we've been having these discussions about life, the universe, and everything, and what the future holds, and, what he wants to do with his life. And I've counseled him that, you're young, you're not expected to know what you want to do. And now is the time for adventure and to make mistakes. And so, like, I've always kind of infused him with this kind of idea of follow your passion, but like not that, because, like, that phrase, which everybody says, I think is generally bullshit, but that the kernel of that is the idea. But of course, there's more nuance to that. And so when I saw this video, which I did send to my son, and watched it, and then I had him watch it, and then we discussed it. Is I think really what's interesting is, what he says is that as children we have this kind of bravery or courage to be creative. Like, you give a kid something, a problem, and they don't have any boundaries, like to be creative and to express themselves and to like act it out. You give them action figures or Play-Doh or sand, and they'll do anything, and they're so imaginative because they have no,
social
ego.
There's no social constructs.
That right. And so it's like, that creativity to express themselves or their individuality, because that's what they want to do. And then, of course, as we get older, we lose that because we're embarrassed or, because of social norms or whatever. But creativity is really how we discover ourselves and how we discover other people, and how we discover our passion. And that's so important to who we are and discovering who we are and how we discover other people. Watching this and thinking about this and having this discussion with my son, it occurred to me as like in the schools, they are cutting the arts. They're cutting music, they're cutting drama, they're cutting art altogether, and of any type out of the education system. Is this what's missing? Is this why our education, obviously not the only reason, but why our education system is so poor? And is this why one of the things that's missing that's causing us to, and the people in this country to lose our human connection, and why
the creatives have always been the rebels, right?
Right.
So whether you're a rock star, whether you're Dylan or Springsteen, whether you're a poet like Ginsberg, whether you're a fashion designer like Vivienne Westwood, the creators, or whether you're an anarchic film director like Tarantino, the creatives are always the rebels. The establishment never want the rebels to exist. They want to quash creativity because creativity allows freedom of thinking, allows people to have dreams and be outside the guardrails that the establishment want you to be in. So creatives have always been the rebels, and it takes a certain amount of courage. And I think Ethan Hawke also said this in his speech. It takes a certain amount of courage to say, I want to be a creative, because being a creative is being a rebel. Being creative is being anti-establishment. It's being, as much as I want to rail against the Web3 crowd and say that Bored Apes are not art, and I passionately believe that Bored Apes are not art, they are the rebels and the creatives of the current time.
Yeah.
They're the Warhols. The Bored Apes are the Warhols of 2022. And as Mark Twain said, 20 years from now, you'll be more disappointed by the things that you don't do than by the ones you do. Throw off the bowlines, sail away from safe harbor, catch the trade winds in your sails, explore, dream, discover. That's always been the cry for creatives. And I can't believe I can create Mark Twain word for word.
Nerd.
Yeah, I'm a nerd, but I'm a creative. I am actually a creative. Unfortunately, the only two times you can actually be a creative in your life are when you're very, very young and you don't care, or when you're quite old and you've got so much money that you don't give a shit. If you're Ricky Gervais and you've got more money than God, you can say whatever you like. You can be as creative as you want because you know that the rules don't apply to you. And the only other time that applies is when you're young. And we were lucky, right? We didn't have social media. We didn't have an immutable record of everything we said when we were 17. Yeah. The old phrase of what goes on tour stays on tour was actually real because there were no photos. There was nothing to sort of say, oh, but by the way, when you were 11, you said X. And it's like, yeah, but I was 11. These days, I feel sorry for kids slightly that if they say something creative and they put it on Twitter, it'll be recorded for all time. I'm a bit of an outlier because I have a classical education.
Right.
I can quote sonnets. I can quote Mark Twain. I can quote W.H. Auden. And I wish that people who were building the metaverse and Web3 had the same education. Look, Plato 2,000 years ago said this was a bad idea. So why is it a good idea now?
I feel like such an old guy sometimes.
Well, you're not as old as 4,000 years ago. You know, Socrates has got some years on you.
No, right. But, like we sit here and we talk about these things. We quote Mark Twain. We talk about books. And we're like, we wish we could we sound like those old guys. Like, get off my lawn. To the kids of today, the Web3 kids.
The Marvel movies work because they are parables. They tell stories that have a basic truth to them, that the good guys are good and the bad guys are bad. And
have you seen?
That's great, but
Good Lord Bird.
I have not.
Put that on your list. I think it was on Showtime.
Good Lord Bird?
Yes. Look it up. It is a historical show based in fact. It was out during the pandemic. I think you will enjoy it tremendously.
All right. I'll look that one up. I have watched the first episode of The Old Man.
Oh, well.
I think it has potential. I'm looking forward to the rest.
I am
had a bit of a slow start, slightly slow start, but that's all right. Getting into it now, I can see there's some interesting stuff going on with John Lithgow.
I'm an unabashed fan of Jeff Bridges, as you know, but you know as well as I do that you cannot watch anything with Jeff Bridges in it now and not hear the Big Labowski when he talks.
See, I was never a big fan of the Big Lebowski.
Well, whether you're a fan of him or not,
my favorite Jeff Bridges film, which I've just listened to I don't know if you listened to Smartless, the podcast. So they got Jeff Bridges on in their latest episode. He's going through his things. My favorite Jeff Bridges film, again because I'm an outlier, is the Fabulous
Baker Boys.
Fabulous Baker Boys.
Yeah, of course, it's one of my favorites too. Actually, I will agree with you. I think it is my favorite one. And I love Michelle Pfeiffer.
She's good in it. Bo is good in it.
But his voice.
Soundtrack by Dave Grusin, which is bloody
amazing. Awesome. I can't hear Jeff Lebowski when I hear him talk. Like his hey, there's a beverage here, man.
I don't remember it. It wasn't. It was one of those films that kind of passed me by. I didn't ever see it. I know it's probably sacrilegious to say, but
it is sacrilegious. It is a great movie, and I'm a huge Coen Brothers completist.
By the time this airs on Sunday night, the trailer for Clerks III will be out.
Oh, that's right. Actually, isn't the movie out, or is it just the trailer?
The trailer. I follow Kevin Smith, and he's been spamming his Instagram feed with watch the trailer. I think the trailer drops tonight, American time, Wednesday night. Were you a big fan of the original Clerks?
Of course. I am a fan of Kevin Smith, good, bad, or indifferent. I've seen him. I've met him in person. I've seen him live speak. And he does that tour where he goes out and speaks in front of a.
No, I listened to Smodcast since it was
a long time
ago. Hollywood Babylon. So, what's your favorite Kevin Smith movie then?
Well, gosh, I'm gonna have to say, and it's not. I'm not contending it's his best movie, but I am saying it is my favorite. I'm gonna have to go with Mallrats.
Do you know what? I'm with you.
I'm going to have to go with you. Like a chocolate-covered pretzel.
No, I'm Mallrats, and it's a silly, silly film, but I love it. And I think
too.
Closely followed by Dogma.
You know what? I will go with you on that one as well. I will watch Clerks 3. I will support Kevin Smith.
Yeah, I was a big fan of Clerks too. Clerks I love because he is such an amazing dialogue guy. He is. He's a fantastic script writer, and his dialogue is amazing. So
and he's done so many other things. He's I just have respect for him as a writer. I have a respect for him as a cinephile and as a comic book person, somebody who really knows, he wrote the He-Man show for Netflix.
And he's directed a bunch of Supergirl stuff and Degrassi.
Yeah.
I think he did a remake of Degrassi as well, didn't he?
Yeah. He's deep in pop culture and comic book culture.
Speaking of, I've been going down a rabbit hole, a YouTube rabbit hole of Taika Waititi's interviews. Because the new Thor movie's out, and he's been doing a whole bunch of press stuff. And
they're fantastic.
I can't get enough of him. He's just brilliant.
He is brilliant. I was just going to say that movie comes out this weekend too. Taika Waititi, he also did a TED Talk too. You should look that up. I'm not going to say anything more than that. Just seek it out. On creativity. Just find it. You'll laugh. He is singularly unique and funny, and I really like him a lot. Well, Taika Waititi could care less.
And that's what I was kind of saying. Ricky Gervais can be incredibly creative / offensive because he's got so much money that it doesn't matter. He can just, if he never works again, it doesn't matter. So he can do whatever he wants. And Taika Waititi's kind of the same. He's like, well, do your worst.
Yeah, but
if you never hire me again, I don't care because I've done it. I've been there.
Here's where I think the difference with Taika Waititi is, and this is what I kind of gleaned from his TED Talk. Whether he has money or not, he doesn't care. Like, he considers himself, and not in a pretentious way, an artist. He never intended to do film. Film was just one tool in a toolbox that allowed him to express himself, and he got to try it. And if he never gets to make another film, he could care less.
Right.
He paints, he draws, he makes music, he does all of these other things. He's having fun making films. And at some point, he may decide this isn't fun anymore, and he may never make another film.
Which kind of circles back to being the opposite of what you said about following your passion. He's one of these guys that following your passion has worked.
Yeah.
That he doesn't
his passion
he doesn't give a crap about the guardrails. He doesn't give a crap about what people think. He's like, this is what I like. This is what I want to do. I'm going to go and do it. If it makes me a ton of money, then so be it. If it doesn't, then so be it. I can just move back to New Zealand where life is cheap.
But we're all similar in the sense. So and I'm making an assumption, and I think it's correct. For you and I, my passion is at its core, I love to, in a sense, solve problems, which is why I do what I like to do.
Right.
And the medium in which I like to solve problems is business and technology.
Right.
That's what's interesting to me.
Right.
Now, if somebody came along and was like, we want you to solve problems in the maritime industry, I probably wouldn't do that because that doesn't sound interesting to me. I just happen to be doing the thing that I like to do, and I get paid a lot of money to do it. I think that, you're in the same boat. Whereas Taika Waititi is like, his creativity is regardless of the medium. He doesn't care. He could draw, paint, write music, do films, do television. It doesn't matter.
There needs to be a certain amount of serendipity in order to be able to have those opportunities. So you can be the most creative person in the world, and you still wouldn't necessarily get the opportunities that he's had, and he's made the most of those opportunities, and great. Not everyone gets the opportunity to express their creativity in the way that in the way
that's right.
He has. So
that's right. And I think that I don't know if he's got a different kind of creativity than we have, or he's just able to express it better than we are.
Last year, I started writing a film script because a friend of mine's a producer. We had a WhatsApp call, and it was a bizarre WhatsApp call. And he said, David, why don't you write a script? That's all about opportunity. That's all about being in the right place, the right time, knowing the right people.
It's not so funny that you say that.
It's not a meritocracy. Just because someone's creative doesn't mean they're going to
100%. It's so funny you say that because, as a lover of film myself, many times I'm like, man, I should write a script about the ALMS. our time at the LMS, because it writes itself. Or working my time and working in the ad industry, in the marketing business, ad agencies, or working in consulting, because it just writes itself. It would be a hilarious movie. And I 100% know I could do it. I write well. Just pat myself on the back. But it's like less about doing it and more about like, I got other things I'd rather do. And it would probably be fun and interesting to learn how to write a script the right way.
I did that last year. So it's one of these things, like the more you know about it, it's like magician's tricks. Once you know the trick, the shine comes off it. So Blake Snyder, who passed away in 2009, wrote a book called Save the Cat, which I read last year. And it's very, very, very cynical, but it ruins movies forever. Once you've read this book, you will never watch a movie the same way again. It literally breaks down. It says, right, there are 7 types of movies. Here are the 7 types. Here are how the 7 types work. On page 10, this happens. On page 50, this happens. On page 80, this happens. On page 160, this happens. Absolutely takes it all away.
That does not sound good at all.
But I did it as an exercise. I read the book. I wrote a script based on his framework. And now when I watch movies, I'm like, oh, dear. There's some breakouts. There's some different ones, right? There's some guys who are doing something different.
You've heard the Dan Harmon formula, comedy formula, the Dan Harmon story circle. And it's a very famous, repeatable sitcom process for comedy writing that is now very overused. It's funny you bring that up. I was having a really deep conversation over the weekend, the long holiday weekend, with some friends about writing and shows. And, as you know, I'm a big fan of Stranger Things, which they have now released the 4th season in its entirety. They broke it up into a couple bits. They just put out the last bit here last weekend. And, they've announced that the next season is the last season, which I'm thankful for. And somebody was like, I can't believe you're so happy that it's going to be over. And I'm like, well, I'm not happy that it's over. I'm happy that they're wise enough to end the show when it's still good.
Which is what we said last time we were speaking. The British formula, which is 6 episodes, 8 episodes, start, middle, end, done.
Stranger Things now, 5
slow horses.
Slow horses.
8 episodes. Boom, boom, boom. Done. Not 17 seasons of 24 episodes. Just 8 episodes. Right. Boom, boom, boom.
And be done with it. And it's a good formula. All of the best shows in America, at least anyway, they reached their peak and then they were like, that's it. Seinfeld even is like, they were like, that's it. We're not doing any more.
Yeah, but how many years did that go for?
It went for a long time, but like Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld were like, that's it. We got nothing else for these characters.
Right.
They were smart enough to be like, we got nothing.
Not like NCIS, which is what, season 25 or something?
Right. Or Grey's Anatomy, which is like season 160, or like The Simpsons. The Simpsons, that's literally been on since the 90s. It's still
I think
on.
The Simpsons are slightly different because they can probably write satirical what's happening now into the
but it's not as good. It's just not as good as I've watched it. These old things just go on, and they don't make room for new things. And it's the same thing with movies, like we talked about previously.
No, I think that's changing because of digital and streaming. So the streaming companies,
thank God.
The streaming companies know exactly how many people are watching. They know how many episodes people are watching. They know where in the episode people drop off. I think they're getting smart now. They can say, but we'll kill it after 3 episodes because we know no one's watching it.
Data is not the same as fact.
That's right. And next week I am flying to Australia on Thursday morning, but we will do our podcast before I fly to
Australia. You got to do live from Australia. Hey, have a great flight. Great to talk to you as always. Have a good week.
Mate. Have a great week.